The night before my sister's lavish Christmas party, I stood on her front porch, holding a tin of homemade peppermint cookies, and telling myself not to read too much into the silence on the other side of the door. Snow drifted in slow circles around me, settling on my coat sleeves, melting against the warmth of my breath. The lights framing her house glowed in soft gold, matching the garlands wrapped neatly around the railing. The wreath on the door, the perfectly staged holiday cheer she'd always been so good at creating. But something colder pressed beneath all of it. Something familiar. Something sharp. I felt it long before she opened the door. I felt it in the way the wind stalled, as if even the night itself was holding its breath. And I remember thinking strangely foolishly that maybe this time we'd make it through Christmas without breaking each other. Maybe she would see me. Maybe she would let me in. Instead, when the door finally swung open, and she stood there in her silver dress rehearsal gown, hair curled for tomorrow's photos, she smiled at me with a sweetness that felt like ice cracking. And then she said the sentence that would unravel everything. "Do you know the greatest gift for our family this Christmas? You disappearing." For a moment I couldn't breathe. For a moment I wasn't 30, I was 7, 10, 15 again, hearing every version of you ruin things, you complicate things. You're the reason nothing feels easy. I didn't know then that this sentence wouldn't ruin me. It would free me. I had driven to her house after a long shift, the kind where fluorescent lights clung to your skin even after you'd stepped outside. The December air in Portland carried that metallic cold I had grown up with, the kind that felt like tiny blades brushing across my cheeks. My car groaned a little as I pulled into her driveway, the tires crunching over the thin crust of ice forming across the pavement. Inside the house, warm light glowed through the windows, flickering faintly against the silhouette of her Christmas tree. I turned off the engine and stayed inside for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. Even after everything, years of walking on the thin line between closeness and collapse, I still wanted tonight to be different. I still wanted to believe in sisterhood like it was something we could hold, not something that slipped through our fingers every time life got heavy. When I finally stepped out of the car, snowflakes brushed against my eyelashes. I balanced the tin of cookies in one hand and my purse in the other, climbed the steps and let myself in without knocking a habit born from childhood and stubborn nostalgia. Her house looked like the cover of a holiday magazine. Garland draped the railing of the staircase, twinkling lights looped perfectly across the mantel, and a dozen candles flickered from various surfaces, smelling faintly of pine and citrus. Crates of crystal ornaments sat open on the rug, half unpacked. The hum of Christmas music drifted from the sound system, something smooth and orchestral. "Evelyn," I called softly. Her voice floated from the guest room. Back here, I made my way down the hall. The guest room door was open, and inside she stood in front of the mirror wearing the top half of a shimmering silver gown pins, still holding the fabric in place. She looked beautiful in the effortless way she always had, poised, luminous, the kind of beauty that made people offer her things she never had to ask for. She turned when she saw me, lips lifting into a bright smile. But something in her eyes didn't match the warmth in her voice. "Oh, good, you made it," she said. "I was hoping you'd come early." I set the cookie tin on her dresser. "I figured you'd need help." "I do," she replied lightly. "Just not the kind you think." Her words slid past me, at first too soft to catch. I moved closer, smoothing a wrinkle near the seam of her bodice. "You look amazing," I said. She examined herself in the mirror. "I know." Then she turned sharply, her expression bright, almost too bright. "Did you bring the gift I asked for?" I frowned. "I didn't know you wanted something specific." Her smile froze. "Of course you did." Something cold pooled in my stomach as she stepped closer. She reached out almost tenderly, brushing a stray hair behind my ear. Then her hand fell back to her side. "Madison," she said softly, "the greatest gift you could give our family this Christmas is disappearing." Everything in me went still. I heard the words. I understood them. But they formed a shape so brutal, so casual, that my mind stalled on the meaning. She said it with such ease, as if she were asking me to bring a salad to dinner, instead of asking me to erase myself from the holiday entirely. Before I could respond, Gavin appeared in the doorway. He wore a white button-down and that polished customer service smile he carried everywhere like he practiced in the mirror, until it fit him like a mask. His presence filled the room with a pressure I had become familiar with, a subtle tightening, a sense of being assessed, judged, measured against some invisible standard. "Don't take it personally," he said, stepping into the room and placing a hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "Big events always bring out tension. You know how sensitive she gets." Evelyn nodded along almost gratefully. I rose from where I had been adjusting the hem, my knees popping slightly. "Is this really what you meant?" I asked her. She looked at me the way someone looks at a stain they can't scrub out of a perfect white shirt. "You always bring complications, Madison. You cloud things. This is supposed to be a joyful weekend. I don't want your energy around." "My energy?" I echoed slowly. Gavin chuckled quietly. "She doesn't mean anything harsh. You tend to misread her." My chest tightened with something sharper than hurt. Something like clarity. I straightened the skirt one more time, more out of muscle memory than care. I had always been the helper, the fixer, the one who made things easier. I had spent my childhood stitching myself into the cracks she created so neither of us would fall through. "Not tonight." "I should go," I said. Evelyn shrugged, as if that were the most natural answer in the world. I walked to the doorway. As I passed Gavin, he leaned slightly toward Evelyn and murmured, "See, exactly what I said. She makes everything about herself." She didn't disagree. The hall felt colder than it had when I arrived, as if the temperature had dropped 10 degrees the moment she dismissed me. I grabbed my coat, slipping my arms into it without bothering to button the front. The house's warmth suddenly felt too heavy, too false, as if every string of lights were trying to hide a rot beneath. Outside, the wind had picked up. Snow flurried sideways, stinging my cheeks as I crossed the driveway. I fumbled for my keys with fingers that trembled not from the cold, but from something breaking quietly inside me. I sat behind the wheel and closed the door. The silence inside the car wrapped around me, thick and suffocating. I pulled my hands away from the steering wheel and stared at the imprints my fingers had left on the leather. The words echoed again. "The greatest gift is you disappearing." I let out a slow, shaky breath. I didn't cry. I expected to. My sister had just sliced me open with a sentence meant to push me out of the one place I still tried to belong. But instead of pain blooming inside me, something else rose, something still sharp and strangely steady. I turned the key in the ignition. On the drive home, Portland's December streets blurred past in streaks of gold and white. Christmas lights glowed softly from storefronts. Families walked bundled in scarves and heavy coats. Cars moved carefully over salted roads. The world felt normal, perfectly normal. Except I wasn't. By the time I reached my apartment, my ears were burning from the cold. I tossed my keys onto the counter and sank into the dining chair. My computer was still open from that morning, the blue glow casting a faint light across the room. As if pulled by instinct, I clicked open my email. A new message from my attorney blinked at the top. I opened it without thinking. Attached was an annual property record for the condo my mother left behind the condo I had renovated, gifted, and believed Evelyn had taken over. The document listed only one owner. Me. My throat tightened. I stared at the screen, reading the line again and again. Sole owner. No transfer. No joint claim. For a long moment I just sat there, the room around me fading out until all I could see was my mother's handwriting on the original deed, the nights I spent sanding floors, the afternoons Evelyn cried in the doorway telling me no one had ever loved her like I did. I thought of tonight. I thought of her smile when she told me to disappear. And then I whispered into the empty room, "If my presence is a problem, then I'll give her a gift she'll never forget." My voice didn't shake. Not anymore. I closed the laptop slowly, letting the realization sink in with the finality of a door clicking shut. Something old inside me, something obedient, something apologetic finally broke free. I didn't know the whole truth yet, but I would. And whatever waited at the center of this unraveling, I would face it without disappearing. Not this Christmas. Not ever again. I left Evelyn's house with the cold biting through my coat, but I barely felt it. Her words echoed all the way down the frozen steps through the dark driveway and into the silence of my car. The greatest gift for our family is you disappearing from Christmas. I sat the steering wheel for a long moment, watching my breath fog the windshield, hearing nothing but the soft tick of cooling metal beneath the hood. It was strange how an insult could feel both brand new and decades old, like she had just said it for the first time, yet somehow I had been preparing my whole life to hear it. I finally turned the key and pulled away from the curb, the tires crunching over a fresh sheet of snow. Christmas lights glowed on the neighboring houses, warm little galaxies strung across porches, windows, mailboxes. Families inside were probably decorating cookies, wrapping gifts, clinking glasses, getting ready for a holiday that wasn't supposed to wound. I drove past them slowly, the brightness making my chest ache. I had always believed that one day Evelyn and I would heal enough to stand in the same room without me feeling like a shadow in her light. That maybe Christmas could soften us, melt the frost that had settled between us all these years. But tonight proved it hadn't melted anything, it had only sharpened the edges. By the time I reached my townhouse, the neighborhood was quiet and still. I parked in the driveway and didn't move right away. The porch light glowed weakly, flickering at the edges like it might give out. I exhaled and forced myself to step out into the cold. Inside the house felt too big, too clean, too silent for December. Most people filled their living rooms with pine-scented candles and twinkling lights and stockings. I hadn't decorated at all. I had been planning to spend Christmas Eve with Evelyn, helping her set up the dessert table and floral arrangements for the lavish party she'd been planning for months. Now the idea of stepping foot inside her house again made my stomach clench. I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter and braced my hands against the edge of the sink, my arms trembling from the anger I'd shoved down. Not hot anger, cold, exhausted, decade-old anger. I whispered to myself that I would not cry tonight. I had done enough crying for her over the years, but tears came anyway, blurring the faint Christmas lights outside the window. I wiped my face with the back of my sleeve and inhaled slowly. And then my laptop chimed. The sound startled me, not because it was loud, but because it came from the one corner of my life I still felt in control of. Work, structure, numbers, predictability. I walked to the dining table where my laptop sat open from earlier that afternoon. A new email notification blinked at the bottom of the screen. The subject line made my heartbeat skip. Annual Property Summary, Lakeside Condominium Unit 3B, my mother's condo. The one I had poured 2 years of my 20s into renovating. The one Evelyn had lived in. The one she always assumed would eventually be hers no matter what paperwork said. For a moment I just stared at the email, unable to open it. Something in me resisted, like I already knew the truth but wasn't ready for confirmation. But I clicked. The summary opened in a clean PDF window. I scanned the first few lines. Property owner Madison Pierce, sole owner. No additional parties, no pending transfers, no liens, no shared rights. My throat tightened. I scrolled down, searching for anything that contradicted what I knew. Nothing. The condo was still legally mine, exactly as it had been since my mother passed it down to me. And Evelyn had never said a word. She had accepted my help, accepted the renovations, accepted the keys. But she had never taken legal responsibility. I sat back in my chair slowly. Was this negligence, or had she known exactly what she was doing? A memory came sharply into focus, a conversation from a few months ago. Evelyn had texted me late one night asking if she could borrow a few $1,000s. She said wedding expenses were stacking up, vendors needed payments, and her accounts were getting complicated. I had wired the money without hesitation. A week later, she asked again, and again. The last time I asked her if everything was okay with her finances, she'd grown defensive in that tight, brittle way she always did when she was hiding something. Now I wondered what those complications had been, or who had caused them. I rubbed my forehead and stood pacing the quiet kitchen. Her words from earlier sliced through me again. The greatest gift for our family is you disappearing from Christmas. That wasn't irritation. That wasn't stress. That was resentment sharpened into a blade. But resentment didn't appear out of nowhere. It grew from seeds someone planted. And I had a terrible suspicion about who had been planting them. Gavin. I tried to replay every interaction I had ever had with him. The first time I met him, he was charming in a curated sort of way, like someone who had studied what kindness looked like rather than felt it. He smiled easily, maybe too easily. He always placed a hand on Evelyn's shoulder when she spoke, as if silently claiming her. He always changed the topic when money came up. He always apologized on her behalf for small things she never did wrong. He always looked directly into my eyes, holding the gaze just one beat too long. At the time, I brushed it off as confidence. Now I saw something else. Calculation, pride, ownership. I poured myself a glass of water, but my hands shook so badly I had to set it down before it spilled. If the condo was still mine, why had Evelyn been acting like it was already her asset? Why had she been borrowing money so frequently? Why had she reacted so violently to the idea of me showing up for Christmas, and why had she let Gavin speak for her? Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. I reached for my phone, intending to call her demand answers, unravel this knot before it tightened any further. But then I stopped. Calling Evelyn when she was spiraling had always been a mistake. She met confrontation with defensiveness. She met worry with accusations. She met truth with retreat. And if Gavin was already twisting her perception of me, a late-night confrontation would only push her further away. I dropped the phone onto the couch cushions and sank down beside it. No, I couldn't talk to Evelyn. Not yet. I needed clarity. I needed facts. I needed someone who could see the situation without emotion, because mine were boiling over. My mind drifted to someone I hadn't thought about in months. Ethan Walden, a corporate investigator I had worked with 2 years earlier during a messy internal audit. He was precise, calm, unnervingly good at finding information people wanted buried. The last time I saw him, he had uncovered an embezzlement trail that ran through 4 departments and 3 separate shell accounts, all while drinking a lukewarm black coffee and talking like he was discussing the weather. He didn't miss things. Ever. I grabbed my phone again and scrolled through my contacts, my pulse quickening. His number was still there. I hesitated only 1 second before pressing call. He picked up on the 3rd ring. His voice was exactly the same, steady, low, unbothered by the hour. Madison. I exhaled shakily. Hi, Ethan. Sorry for calling late. I need help. There was a soft creak on his end, like he'd leaned back in a chair. Tell me what's going on. I didn't know where to begin. The insult from Evelyn, the property email, the money she borrowed, the man she was about to marry, the fear tightening in my chest. But the words came anyway, tumbling out, overlapping, pushing the dam wide open. When I finished, the silence on the other end wasn't dismissive. It was focused. I could practically hear the gears turning. When can you meet? He asked. Tomorrow morning, I whispered. Before the Christmas party. Before anything else can happen. Then I'll see you at 9, he said. And Madison, until then, don't confront anyone. You need information first. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Okay, get some rest, he added gently. You sound exhausted. I am. But rest didn't come. I lay awake for hours, replaying every memory of Evelyn, every holiday from childhood, every time she had looked at me with that mix of love and resentment. I pictured her in the shimmering silver Christmas gala dress she tried on tonight, adjusting the bodice while telling me with a cold smile to disappear. And beneath her voice I kept hearing Gavin's, soft, coaxing, poisonous. I didn't know what he had done, not yet. But I knew what I had felt tonight. And instinct never lied. Not about men like him. When dawn finally broke, pale sunlight spilled across my ceiling. I sat up slowly, my body heavy, my mind sharper than it had been hours earlier. Today would bring answers, and maybe consequences. I got dressed, brushed my hair, and forced myself to eat half a piece of toast, though it tasted like dust. As I grabbed my coat, something caught my eye, a small framed photo on my entry table. Evelyn and me decorating Mom's old artificial Christmas tree when we were kids. I was 8, she was 11, both of us in fleece pajamas covered in snowflakes. Her arm was around my shoulder, mine was around her waist. We had been all we had left after Mom died. And somehow, somewhere along the way, that bond had bent and warped until it barely resembled anything we once knew. I touched the edge of the frame gently. "I hope you're okay," I whispered, unsure if I meant her or myself. Then I grabbed my keys and walked out into the cold December morning. I was going to meet Ethan. And if my instincts were right, the truth waiting for me would change everything I thought I knew about my sister, and the man she was letting into our family. Snow was still drifting down in soft, lazy flakes as I pulled into the cafe parking lot. The Christmas garlands wrapped around the street lamps glittered faintly in the early light, and warm yellow bulbs glowed behind the front windows, fogging the glass just enough to make everything inside look gentler than the world I had woken up to. I sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel, letting my pulse settle. Today mattered. What I learned here would determine whether the knot twisting in my chest was instinct or paranoia. I stepped inside and was immediately wrapped in the comforting smell of roasted coffee and cinnamon. Holiday music played quietly in the background, a soft instrumental version of a song my mother used to hum while decorating cookies. The memory hit too hard, too unexpectedly. I blinked it away. Ethan was already there. He sat at a corner table facing the entrance, watching the door the way investigators do, calm but alert, observant without trying. He wore a dark wool coat, navy sweater, and the same unassuming expression I remembered from his corporate investigations days. He looked like someone who could blend into any room but would still notice everything. When he saw me, he stood slightly and gave a small nod. I exhaled and walked toward him. "Rough night?" he asked as I sat down. I managed a thin smile. Something like that. He waited, not pushing, letting me gather myself. That was one of the reasons I'd called him instead of anyone else. A server approached, cheerful and bright-eyed, clearly energized by the holiday spirit. I ordered a plain latte I knew I wouldn't finish. Ethan ordered black coffee, no sugar. When the server left, I took a breath, steadying my voice. "I need to know what's going on with my sister," I said quietly. "Something is wrong. I can feel it. And it's tied to her fiancé." "Gavin Rhodes," he said, already flipping open a thin folder. My mouth fell open slightly. "You already started. You sounded worried last night. That was enough." He slid the folder toward me. I ran a preliminary background check. The edge of the folder pressed cold against my fingertips as I pulled it closer. The first page held a photograph of Gavin sharper than the ones Evelyn posted online, less flattering, less polished. The same jawline, the same smug eyes, but the expression was different. Harder, meaner. My stomach tightened. "Where did this come from, Ohio Department of Property Records?" Ethan said. "Under a different last name. Rhodes wasn't the only one he's used in the past 10 years. I stared at the name printed beneath the picture. Gavin Cole. A prickling sensation crawled up my spine. "He lived in Ohio?" I asked. Ethan nodded. "For 2 years on and off. Before that, Michigan. Before that, Illinois. Frequent moves, frequent job changes, no long-term employment, inconsistent tax records. A pattern I've seen before. What kind of pattern?" My throat felt tight. "People who reinvent themselves," he said. "People who leave behind loose ends they hope no one will bother to untangle." I turned the page with trembling hands. More documents, addresses, court filings. My eyes snagged on a section titled Civil Complaint Linda Farrow. "She filed a complaint," I whispered. 2 years ago," Ethan said. He persuaded her to invest her savings into what he called a startup project, promised high returns, then cut contact. Did he steal her money? Yes. A coldness slipped into my chest. Was he charged? The complaint was dropped. Not enough documentation, and by the time anyone pushed, he was gone. I shook my head slowly. He charmed her, manipulated her. He's done it to others, Ethan said softly. More than one complaint. Always the same pattern: financial pressure, emotional manipulation, sudden disappearance. I swallowed hard memories of Evelyn's recent strange behavior tumbling through my mind like dominoes. The borrowed money, the defensiveness, the secrecy, the fear in her eyes when I mentioned rising expenses. What about here? I asked. Has he done anything in Wisconsin? Ethan pulled out a separate page. Not documented. But he's been making visits to several local banks. I cross-referenced his phone pings from public records. He's been in and out of branches that handle home equity lines and personal collateral loans. I stared at him. Why would he need home equity loans if he doesn't own property? Ethan met my eyes steadily. He might be using someone else's. My pulse stuttered. There was only one property in our immediate circle worth anything substantial. My condo, I whispered. He nodded. It's legally yours. But I found signs he's been preparing something. Draft files. Incomplete applications. Nothing submitted yet. I put a hand to my chest to steady the pressure building there. He's trying to use my condo as collateral, but he can't. I never signed anything. Not yet, Ethan said. But if he manipulated Evelyn into co-signing anything under the assumption the property was hers, she thought it was hers, I cut in abruptly. She always assumed it would be hers. Mother left it to me, but Evelyn... She clung to the idea that it was a shared gift, that I would just hand it over. Did she ever mention paperwork, a transfer? Ethan asked. No, never. Then legally he said it's still completely in your name. That protects you. But not her. I looked down at the folder, the pages blurred by the hot sting of tears. She told me to disappear. I whispered more to myself than to him. She told me the best Christmas gift I could give was to vanish from our family. Why would she say that? Why now? Ethan considered this carefully. Has she been more anxious lately? Yes. Secretive? Yes. Borrowing money? Yes. Then she knows something is wrong, he said gently. Maybe not consciously, maybe not fully, but part of her senses she's in over her head. The waitress returned with our drinks, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing at our table. When she left, I wrapped my hands around the latte cup, hoping the heat would thaw the numbness creeping through me. What do? I whispered. First, Ethan said, leaning back, you protect yourself. If he's targeting your property, you remove that option. Take it off the table. How? Sell it, he said calmly. Move it out of reach before he can get documentation through. Even incomplete drafts can be used to confuse things later if the right manipulative hands get involved. Sell my mother's condo. The thought hit deep. That place was the last physical connection to her. The tiny balcony, the hardwood she loved, the kitchen she dreamed of remodeling. But I saw Evelyn's face in my mind, pale, anxious, brittle around the edges, and Gavin's voice beneath hers. Disappearing from Christmas would be a gift. Maybe selling the condo wasn't losing something. Maybe it was reclaiming something. I'll do it, I heard myself say. Ethan nodded once as if he had expected that answer. Second, he said, you gather documentation. We're not accusing anyone blindly. We're building truth. I watched him pull a small silver USB from his coat pocket and place it quietly between us. On here, he said, is everything so far. Plus public filings from Michigan and Ohio. You'll need it. I stared at it. Such a small object. Such heavy implications. What about the Christmas party? I asked. My voice felt too soft. It's tomorrow night, a huge event, hundreds of guests. She's been planning it for months. Then tomorrow is your deadline, Ethan said. After that, he may have enough access socially, emotionally, financially to push things forward before you can intervene. The air seemed to thin. You think he's dangerous? I think he's opportunistic, Ethan said, which can be just as harmful. I pressed my hand against my forehead. She'll never believe me. Not without proof. Then you give her proof, he said simply. How, I whispered. His expression was calm but firm. People like Gavin rely on shadows, on quiet, on secrets. If you expose the truth in a place he can't control, he loses power. A sharp breath escaped me. You mean at the Christmas party? He didn't confirm with words. He didn't need to. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the moment settling into my bones. Snowflakes drifted past the window, glowing silver under the morning light. Christmas was always supposed to be warm, hopeful, bright. This year it was going to be a battlefield. Thank you, I said quietly, for helping me. His gaze softened. You're not alone in this, and you're doing the right thing. I wished I believed him completely. We sat in silence for a few breaths, the kind of silence that isn't empty but full of things that don't have names yet. Then I stood. I should go, I said. There's a lot I have to do. Ethan rose with me. I'll keep digging. I'll text if I find anything else. I nodded, slipped the USB into my coat pocket, and forced myself to walk toward the door without looking back. The cold air hit my cheeks immediately as I stepped outside, sharp enough to sting. But beneath the sting was something else. Resolve. I walked to my car, feeling the weight of the truth pressing into my pocket, a cold little reminder that everything was about to change. The Christmas lights strung across the street lamp flickered softly in the wind, warm and bright against the gray winter morning. I stared at them for a moment. This was not the Christmas I expected. But it was the one I would survive. The drive to the condo felt longer than it ever had, even though the roads were clear and the sky was a pale winter blue. Snowbanks lined the sidewalks like soft frozen walls, and holiday wreaths hung on nearly every door I passed. People were moving through their normal lives, scraping ice off windshields, carrying grocery bags, walking dogs with little knitted sweaters, completely unaware that I was heading toward the place where my past and present were about to collide. The place that held everything I had once tried to give my sister, and everything she had assumed she could take. The place Gavin had quietly tried to sink his claws into. I parked in the small lot behind the building and shut off the engine, sitting for a moment in the cold silence. The condo windows faced the lake, and through the faint fog of winter, I could still see the shimmer of water under the ice. My mother loved that view. She said it reminded her that even frozen things eventually moved again. I didn't know if that was comforting right now or painful. I stepped out of the car, the metal door handle cold enough to bite my fingers through my gloves. Each step toward the entrance felt like I was walking deeper into a place I used to know, a home that had been suspended in time. When I unlocked the door and pushed it open, the familiar scent washed over me, fresh paint mixed with faint vanilla from the candle I'd left on the counter last summer. Evelyn had added her touches too. I could see them in the neatly folded blankets, the rearranged furniture, the decorative pillows she favored. But beneath all of it was still my mother's condo, my mother's space, my space. The silence inside felt thick, echoing, lonely. And yet, as I closed the door behind me, a calmness settled into my bones. Not peace, something more like readiness. I walked through the living room, fingertips brushing over the walls I had sanded and painted myself. The pale gray was still smooth under my touch. I had chosen that color thinking Evelyn would like it, hoping it would be neutral enough for her to make the place her own. I had stood in this very spot years ago, sweaty and exhausted from a 12-hour workday and a 4-hour sanding session, imagining how grateful she would be. Imagining how this place would help stitch our broken family back together. But nothing had ever been simple with us. Love had never been simple. I moved toward the kitchen and opened the cabinets. Most of the dishes were gone, probably boxed up for her Christmas party or moved to Gavin's place. Even the mugs we used to drink cocoa from were missing, replaced by sleeker, colder ones. My chest tightened at the sight. She had been slowly removing pieces of herself and pieces of us from this place. and something about that truth made me feel heavier than anything Gavin had done so far. I opened the drawer under the sink and found the small metal box where I kept older documents, memories, receipts, photos, and a few items belonging to my mother. I lifted it onto the counter and opened it slowly. Inside were papers written in her looping handwriting, including the letter she'd left outlining her wishes for the condo. I traced her signature with my thumb. The condo was always meant for me. She'd intended it as a foundation, a starting point, a bit of stability for the daughter she knew carried the emotional weight of everyone else. She must have known how easily I surrendered pieces of myself, how naturally I stepped into the role of fixer. I whispered into the quiet kitchen. I'm sorry it took me this long to see the truth. The apartment creaked as if in response. I walked to the hallway toward the small bedroom where Evelyn used to sleep. The bed was bare except for a folded blanket. The walls looked emptier than I remembered. The closet door was cracked open, showing nothing inside but a hanger or two. I sat on the edge of the mattress and felt a wave of sadness move through me, soft, deep, and strangely bittersweet. For a moment I could almost see us as teenagers sitting cross-legged on the floor, talking about the lives we hoped we'd have one day. She wanted a life full of noise and celebration, big moments and photographs on mantelpieces. I wanted quiet, a home, peace. Somehow we had both lost our way, tangled in expectations neither of us could name out loud. A sharp knock on the door jolted me. I stiffened, heart racing. No one knew I was here, or at least no one should. I stood carefully, walked into the living room and peeked through the peephole. A woman stood outside, early 50s, auburn hair pulled into a loose bun, a heavy winter coat buttoned up to her chin. She looked familiar. I unlocked the door cautiously. "Can I help you?" I asked. She smiled, but it was sad, tired around the edges. "I'm sorry for the surprise. You must be Madison. I'm your neighbor Melanie. I used to chat with your mother sometimes, and your sister." Recognition flickered. I had seen her in the hallway a few times when Evelyn lived here full-time. "Of course," I said softly. "It's nice to see you again." Her eyes drifted past me into the condo. I didn't know if anyone still stayed here. "It's been so quiet lately." I hesitated, then stepped back to let her inside from the cold. She entered, slowly looking around with a faint, wistful smile. "It looks different," she murmured. "Your sister redecorated a bit, but it still feels like your mother's place. She had such warm energy." My throat tightened. She did. Melanie glanced at me carefully. I wanted to ask, "Are you all right?" I blinked. "Why do you ask?" She hesitated, as though weighing whether to continue. "A few weeks ago I saw your sister leaving in a hurry. She looked upset, and the man she was with, he didn't seem very kind." My pulse quickened. "What did you see?" She sat on the arm of the sofa, nothing dramatic, just a moment. But sometimes a moment says enough. I moved closer. "Please, tell me." She exhaled slowly. I was coming up from my garage and heard raised voices outside the building. "Your sister was crying." The man, he grabbed her arm. Not roughly, but firmly. Too firmly. Like he wanted her to stop talking. She tried to pull away, but he kept talking over her. I only heard pieces: responsibility, money, mistakes, things like that. "Gavin." My hands curled into fists. I almost walked out to check on her. Melanie continued, but when he noticed me, he suddenly softened, smiled, pulled her close like nothing had happened. She wiped her face and acted like everything was fine. A tremor ran through me. Everything inside me felt painfully validated. "I've been worried about her," Melanie said, "but I didn't know how to reach out. And I wasn't sure if she'd want me to." I nodded too quickly, swallowing against the burn in my chest. "Thank you for telling me." She stood, pulling her coat tighter around her. "I just thought you should know." She seemed like someone carrying something too heavy. I exhaled shakily. "She is. She doesn't see it yet." Melanie placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Be careful, dear. Men who hide things get angry when light shines on them." After she left, the silence felt heavier than before, not oppressive, but full. Full of truths I had overlooked, full of warnings I hadn't known how to interpret, full of echoes that finally made sense. I walked back to the kitchen, opened my mother's letter again, and felt a quiet strength settle somewhere deep within me. I had been protecting the wrong parts of my life for too long. Protecting Evelyn from consequences, protecting memories, protecting illusions. But none of those things were real safety. Real safety and real love required truth, even if it broke us. Especially if it broke us. I picked up my phone slowly. My attorney's contact hovered at the top of my recent calls. My thumb hesitated only a second before pressing dial. He answered on the second ring. Madison. Everything all right? Yes, I said steadily. And no. I need to move quickly on something we discussed. You want to list the condo, he said. Immediately. Yes, I whispered. I want it off the table before anyone else can touch it. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. I'll start the paperwork. We can have it live within 24 hours, possibly less. Thank you. After I hung up, I looked around the condo again, really looked. The sunlight filtered through the frost on the windows, dusting the room with a pale ethereal glow. The hardwood floors gleamed softly. The walls seemed to breathe. My mother's presence lingered not in the objects, but in the sense of steadiness she had given me all my life. I whispered, I'm not losing this. I'm choosing something else. I grabbed my coat and keys. As I turned to leave, I paused in the doorway, taking one last long look inside. Not a goodbye, a closure. The moment I stepped outside, the cold wind cut across my face. It should have startled me, but instead it grounded me. Everything I had learned in the last 24 hours had rearranged the shape of my world. But instead of collapsing under that shift, I stood taller. The condo door clicked shut behind me, a small, decisive sound. A sound like truth, sharpening. A sound like resilience. Tomorrow night the Christmas lights would glitter, guests would arrive in their finest clothes, and Evelyn would try to pretend nothing was wrong. But the truth was coming, and there was no disappearing from that. I left the condo with a strange sense of steadiness pulsing beneath my ribs, as if the cold December air had crystallized something inside me rather than frozen it. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the afternoon light had stretched into a dull gold, the sky humming with that heavy silence that always comes before a snowfall. I carried the small metal box of my mother's letters into the house, setting it gently on the dining table as though it were made of glass. Then I opened my laptop and stared at the blank email draft addressed to my attorney fingers, hovering over the keys. I didn't need to write anything more. The decision had already been made at the condo and the listing paperwork was underway. The property was slipping from the past into the future. My future, not Gavin's. Not Evelyn's. Not anyone else's to manipulate. I closed the laptop and let out a long breath, one that seemed to scrape up everything stuck in my chest for the last 24 hours. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. I had never minded silence, but tonight it clung to me like a shadow. I walked to the living room and turned on a lamp, bathing the room in soft amber light. The Christmas lights outside my neighbor's windows glimmered gently warm and festive in a way my life no longer was. My phone buzzed. For a moment I didn't want to look. The instinct to avoid confrontation, to avoid pain, to avoid Evelyn ran deep, but I forced myself to pick it up. A text message flashed across the screen. From unknown number. Are you available tonight? Found something. E.W. Ethan. My pulse jumped. My fingers moved before my mind caught up. Yes, I'm home. His reply came seconds later. On my way. I stared at the message, my mind spinning. Ethan rarely used vague language. If he said he'd found something, it meant he'd uncovered another piece of whatever puzzle Gavin had built around our lives. I turned on the kettle, automatically needing something warm to hold. By the time steam filled the air, headlights swept across my front window. Ethan stepped out of his car, brushing snow off his coat as he approached the door. I opened it before he knocked. He held a folder under his arm and a grim expression on his face. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he said. "You're saving me from thinking too much," I replied, stepping aside. "Come in." He walked inside, pausing to take in the dim, quiet living room. "You all right?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think I'm better than I was this morning." He nodded once, then set the folder down on the table. "You should sit." That sentence alone made my stomach twist. I sat in my usual dining chair, bracing my hands on the edges as he opened the folder. Pages rustled like whispers. I dug deeper into the financial trail, he said, and I checked a few local records that didn't come up in the first scan. "What records?" My voice felt faint. "Short-term credit applications, temporary accounts, requests for bridge loans." My breath hitched. "Under whose name, not yours," he said quickly. "But close, Evelyn," I whispered. He nodded. "Partially, but mostly Gavin. He's been using her as a financial anchor." I felt my pulse throb in my throat. "Explain." Ethan slid a printout toward me. "This is a draft loan application he started last week. It wasn't completed, but it was close. It listed collateral assets, projected income, and co-responsibility signatures." The room seemed to sway. Co-responsibility. That means your sister would be liable for any debt if anything happened. Legally, he was positioning her as the safeguard for his own financial risk. My hands tightened into fists. She'd be responsible for his debts. Yes, and he'd walk away clean. That, Ethan said, is exactly what men like him do. The lamp hummed in the silence that followed. I traced the top of the document with trembling fingertips. But he couldn't access my condo. No, Ethan agreed. It was still off limits unless you signed something. But that wouldn't have stopped him long term. He had begun laying groundwork, visits to banks, preliminary talks, casual mentions of shared assets. He was preparing the stage. "And Evelyn had no idea," I whispered. "She was already in deep," he said gently. "Manipulation works in layers. By the time someone realizes they're trapped, they're already tangled." A sharp ache formed behind my ribs. Evelyn may have treated me coldly, may have hurt me more than I wanted to admit, but she didn't deserve this. Not this kind of entanglement. I cleared my throat. "What else did you find?" Ethan hesitated, a rare thing. "There's more, and it's worse." He pushed another document toward me, a photocopy of a check. My breath caught. Made out to Evelyn Pierce, signed by Gavin Cole. Amount $18,000, memo investment opportunity. But what caught my eye wasn't the amount. It was the handwriting in the corner. A signature that didn't match the rest of the check, in Evelyn's handwriting. He said I should sign it before he deposits it. He said it would help us. He said it was for our future. My hands shook so violently I had to grip the edge of the table. "He forged her involvement," I whispered. "Or pressured her," Ethan said. "Both are dangerous." I pressed my palm to my forehead. "He's using her money, her accounts, her name, her trust." Ethan's voice softened. "She thinks she's building a life with him. He's building an exit." A cold wave washed over me, the kind that made it hard to breathe. I forced myself upright. "Does she know any of this?" "No," Ethan said firmly. "If she did, she wouldn't be planning a Christmas party with him." Christmas. The lavish event she had spent months planning. The one she believed would mark the start of her picture-perfect life. The party where she told me to disappear because she thought I dimmed her happiness. She had no idea the man she was celebrating was preparing to strip her life bare. A tightness coiled inside me, a blend of anger, fear, and something deeper. Resolve. Ethan watched me quietly. "You have a choice. Protect her now, or wait until she's too entangled to save." "What would you do?" I asked softly. He didn't answer immediately. Truth is the only thing that breaks manipulation. But truth hurts, and public truth hurts more. I swallowed. "He won't stop unless someone stops him." "No," Ethan said. "He won't." I stared at the documents spread across the table, all the proof, all the patterns, All the signs Evelyn never saw or refused to see. "This is the only chance," I whispered. "Tomorrow, at the party." Ethan gave a single steady nod. "Then we do it smart. We do it prepared. And we make sure every guest sees the truth for themselves." I closed my eyes and breathed. "I'll need help." "You have it," he said simply. The kettle clicked off in the kitchen, breaking the heavy silence. The sound felt almost jarring, like it belonged to a life that had ended an hour ago. I stood and poured hot water into 2 mugs, my hands shaking slightly as I set one in front of him. He accepted it, but didn't drink. He was watching me, not with pity or urgency, but with an understanding I had forgotten existed. "How are you feeling?" he asked quietly. I let out a half laugh. "Like every Christmas song is lying to me." He smiled faintly. "They do that." We sat in silence for a moment, steam rising between us from the mugs. Then I said the truth out loud, the truth I had been circling all day. She told me I was the problem, but the problem was standing right next to her. "She'll see that Ethan said." Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but she will. And when she sees it, I whispered, she'll break. "She'll heal," he corrected. "As long as she has something steady to land on." I swallowed hard. I'm not sure I can be that anymore. "You don't have to be everything," he said. "You just have to be honest." The words felt strangely comforting. He closed the folder and slid it toward me. "I'll revise the summaries and prepare copies. Enough for every table. They'll be concise and impossible to ignore." My breath caught. Every table. "You want the truth out," he said, "then let it walk through the room." I nodded slowly. "She'll hate me." "Maybe," he said. "But she'll also be free. Freedom rarely feels like gratitude at first." Outside, snow began falling again, thin, delicate flakes swirling under the streetlight. The house felt different now, charged with something electric. Something inevitable. I looked at Ethan. "Thank you. For all of this." He stood buttoning his coat. "Get some sleep if you can. Tomorrow will be heavy." I walked him to the door. As he stepped outside, a gust of wind swept a few flakes into the entryway. He turned back once. "Madison." "Yes." "You're doing the right thing." I watched him walk to his car, watched the taillights fade into the snowy street, watched the quiet swallow everything he left behind. Then I closed the door, leaned my forehead against the wood, and let the truth settle inside me. Tomorrow, at Evelyn's lavish Christmas party, everything would unravel, and for the first time in years, I wasn't the one falling apart. I was the one holding the match. The morning of the Christmas party arrived with a low gray sky and a sharp, biting wind that rattled the bare branches against my bedroom window. I hadn't slept more than an hour at a time. My dreams kept jerking me awake, images of Evelyn smiling through tears of Gavin's cold eyes, staring at me across a room full of people, of envelopes scattered like fallen snow across polished tables. When the alarm went off, I reached for it automatically, though I'd been awake long before its chime. My body felt heavy, but my mind was clear in a way that frightened me. Clarity meant inevitability. I dressed slowly, choosing a simple dark green dress that felt appropriate for the party, but invisible enough for the storm ahead. When I brushed my hair, my hands trembled slightly, not with fear, with anticipation. The kind that comes when you know your life is about to change in a way you can't undo. I checked my phone. No calls from Evelyn. 3 messages from my attorney confirming the listing was officially live. 1 quiet text from Ethan. "Copies ready. I'll meet you by the service entrance at 5. I read it twice before typing a reply. "I'll be there." Outside, the wind whipped the snow in quick, frantic spirals. I drove carefully, the tires crunching over ice, my breath fogging the air as I waited for the heater to catch up. The streets looked like a postcard, wreaths on every door, lights draped from every porch, red ribbons tied around lampposts. Children ran bundled in puffy coats, dragging sleds behind them. It would have been beautiful if I wasn't heading toward a truth sharp enough to cut through holiday cheer like glass. As I reached Evelyn's neighborhood, I slowed the car. Her house glowed like a winter palace. Icicle lights glittered along the roofline, casting a soft shimmer on the snow below. Through the large front windows, I could see movement decorators setting up staff carrying trays of glassware, a pianist warming up in the corner. It was everything she had ever wanted. Grandeur, admiration, a scene from a holiday magazine spread. A perfect life. A life built on the shadow of a man who had planned to drain her and disappear. I parked down the street and sat for a moment, letting the sight sink in. Guests would arrive in a few hours. They'd walk through that door with gifts and laughter, unaware that the man hosting them was wearing a mask constructed from lies. I inhaled slowly and stepped out of the car. Inside the house buzzed with energy. A towering 16-foot Christmas tree gleamed with silver ornaments. Garland wound around the banisters, sparkling with tiny warm lights. The scent of pine mixed with cinnamon drifted through the air. Staff moved with precision, placing candles and centerpieces on tables draped in cream linen. It was breathtaking, almost surreal. And yet something felt deeply off. Beneath the glitter, tension hummed like a taut wire. I found Evelyn in the dining room, bent over a chart of table placements. She wore a robe of deep burgundy velvet, her hair pinned in soft curls. From a distance, she looked poised and in control. Up close, I saw the slight shake in her hands, the tightness around her mouth, the redness in her eyes from sleep she hadn't gotten. She looked up when she heard me, her expression flickering with surprise. "Oh, you're here." Her voice was too light, forced. "You said I could come early to help," I replied. "Right, yes." She smoothed the corner of the seating chart, pretending focus. "There's a lot to finish. I don't have time for distractions." The word hit harder than I let her see. "I won't distract you," I said gently. "I'll just stay out of the way." Her shoulders relaxed a fraction, not warmth, but relief. Even now her instinct was to manage me like a variable she didn't trust. Around us, decorators hung crystal snowflakes from the ceiling, each catching the light like tiny stars. Evelyn directed them with the precision of someone orchestrating her entire self-worth into one evening. "You've done a beautiful job," I said quietly. She didn't look at me. "It has to be perfect. People remember Christmas parties, especially the first big one. The first with Gavin." Her jaw tightened. "Yes. He wants everything to feel memorable." Something cold brushed my spine. I wanted to ask what that meant, but she was already walking away toward the kitchen. I followed her slowly, watching the way she set her shoulders back as if bracing for invisible weight. She pushed through the door into the warm, bustling space where caterers prepared trays of hors d'oeuvres. She grabbed a glass of water and took a quick sip before setting it down too hard. "You okay?" I asked. "I'm fine," she said sharply. "Just tired. It's a lot." She avoided my eyes, fussing with a napkin instead. "Has Gavin been helping?" I asked. It was casual on the surface, not casual beneath. Her fingers stilled. "He's busy with last-minute things. But he checked in earlier." She swallowed. "He said tonight will change everything." A faint tremor ran through my hands. I forced myself to breathe evenly. "Evelyn," she lifted her chin. "Stop, not tonight. I can't handle your negativity or your assumptions. I need good energy before the guests come." I swallowed the urge to push back. Her fear was so obvious now that confronting her would only make her retreat deeper into denial. "Okay," I said softly. She walked past me toward the foyer, calling out instructions to a staff member. I stood alone for a moment, leaning my hands against the counter, letting the warmth of the kitchen sink into my palms. My heart felt too heavy for my chest. I checked the time. 3 hours until guests arrived. I needed air. I slipped through the back door into the cold, stepping onto the patio, freshly shoveled clean. The lake behind the house glimmered under a sheet of ice, the winter wind brushing ripples across its surface. My phone buzzed. "Ethan, I'm here." I scanned the driveway. His car was parked near the side gate. The trunk was open just enough for me to see the cardboard box inside, white envelopes neatly stacked, each sealed. truth packaged like a quiet storm. I walked through the yard and met him by the gate. "You're early," I said. "Wanted to go over everything one more time." He handed me one of the envelopes. Inside is a simplified summary. Patterns, complaints, records. Enough to show anyone who he is without overwhelming them. The paper felt heavier than its weight should allow. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "I don't think I've ever been more sure of anything," I whispered. He studied me for a moment. "You're strong, Madison. But even strong people deserve steady ground. After this, don't forget to breathe." I nodded, unable to speak. We carried the boxes along the side of the house through the staff entrance, blending into the flurry of last-minute preparations. No one paid attention to us. We were just two more people caught in the machinery of the night. Inside the ballroom, the tables were already set with fine china crystal glassware and elegant silver chargers. The decor glowed under soft gold lighting, casting a warm sheen across the room. It was undeniably the most beautiful room I had ever seen. And tonight, it would host the ugliest truth Evelyn would ever face. I swallowed hard and helped Ethan place the envelopes one discreetly at each seat. He timed it carefully, making sure staff movements masked our actions. By the 50th table, my pulse felt like a hammer in my chest. We stepped back, surveying the room. "It's done," Ethan said quietly. I breathed out slowly. "There's no going back now." "No," he agreed. "But sometimes forward is the only direction left." We left the room just as the event manager came in with final checklists. Upstairs, I could hear Evelyn's voice drifting down the hallway, too bright, too quick. She was rehearsing her welcome speech, trying to sound confident. The sound twisted something inside me. "She won't understand," I murmured. "Not right away." "No," Ethan said gently. "But she will understand eventually." The truth always catches up. A staff member signaled that sound checks were starting. Music drifted through the air, soft violins warm and sweet, giving the illusion of comfort. I turned to Ethan. "Will you stay? I'll be nearby," he said. "Watching, in case things escalate." "And they might," I said quietly. He met my eyes. "Then you won't face it alone." For a moment the world felt steady. Then Evelyn appeared at the top of the stairs, dressed in shimmering silver that reflected every light in the room. She looked radiant, fragile, determined, and entirely unaware of the truth just beneath the surface. Her gaze met mine for a fraction of a second. A flicker, confusion, hurt, something else I couldn't name. I swallowed the lump in my throat and stepped back, letting her move past me into the spotlight she had been building toward for months. Guests began arriving. Coats rustled, laughter floated, champagne glasses clinked. The night was beginning. And beneath the golden glow of Christmas lights, beneath the shine of polished silver and crystal, beneath the hum of violins, a truth waited. Quiet, inevitable, sharp as winter, and ready to break everything open. Guests began streaming into the house in a rush of perfume, cold air, and layered winter coats. Laughter echoed across the foyer as people greeted one another, their voices rising in warm, excited waves that bounced off the garland-wrapped banisters. The entire room shimmered under the glow of hundreds of tiny white lights. Evelyn stood near the entrance, greeting each person with a wide, practiced smile, her silver dress catching every flicker of brightness like she was made of frost and flame at the same time. But even from across the room I saw the tiny quiver in her fingers when she tucked her hair behind her ear. I saw the sharp inhale she took between greetings. Her smile was perfect, but her eyes told the truth. She was terrified. She didn't know why. She couldn't have. But fear has a way of announcing itself long before the mind understands the source. I stood near the back of the foyer, pretending to help adjust the placement of a few decorative votives, keeping myself busy so no one would notice how tightly my hands shook. The envelopes were already placed. The truth was already sitting quietly waiting at every seat. All that remained was for the night to unfold. I watched Evelyn glide from one guest to another, laughing at compliments, brushing aside worries about the cold weather, promising that tonight would be magical. She looked like the woman she'd always wanted to be admired, envied, loved by a room full of people. She also looked like someone standing too close to a fault line. A cluster of older family friends approached her, complimenting the grandeur of the decor. She flushed with pride, basking in their admiration. Then I heard one of them say something that made her stiffen. "You must be relieved to have so much help from your fiancé," the woman said kindly. Evelyn's smile froze at the edges. "Yes, he's been wonderful. Wonderful." The word trembled faintly. I scanned the room for Gavin. He wasn't by the door. He wasn't in the foyer. I moved toward the sound of the music drifting from the ballroom. The pianist was warming up, fingers gliding over ivory keys like the first snowfall of the season, soft, but with a hint of chill beneath. Guests filtered inside, marveling at the room. Their chatter rose like gentle waves bouncing off crystal glassware and gold-trimmed decor. I took a deep breath and walked through the crowd, keeping my expression neutral. Then I saw him. Gavin stood near the back of the ballroom, adjusting the cuff of his tailored suit, speaking to two men I vaguely recognized, co-workers of his, from some vague consulting role he never fully explained. His laughter was loud, warm, perfectly calibrated. Yet something in the way he leaned in, too close, too controlling, sent a prickling sensation down my spine. His eyes flicked toward the tables, scanning them with the instinct of a man who always measured his surroundings. Then he glanced at Evelyn, who had just entered the ballroom. Her smile brightened at the sight of him. He lifted a hand in acknowledgement, but his eyes did not soften. They rarely did. I drifted toward one of the tables, pretending to adjust a napkin while watching him through the reflection on a glass ornament. He was confident, relaxed, oblivious. He didn't know the envelopes were already there. He didn't know his past stood tonight in this ballroom with him, written in ink and documented for every guest to see the moment dinner began. A server walked by carrying a tray of champagne flutes. I took one even though my throat felt too tight to swallow. The hum of conversation deepened as more guests entered, each bringing another gust of cold air and another burst of holiday energy. And then finally Gavin approached Evelyn. I watched their exchange from a distance, unable to look away. He placed a possessive hand on the small of her back, pulling her slightly closer than necessary. Evelyn leaned in automatically, her shoulders softening as if drawing strength from him, rather than losing it, which was the truth. He whispered something. She nodded too quickly. He kissed her cheek for the audience, not for her. Then his eyes drifted and landed on me. A subtle shift tightened his jaw. He offered a smile, thin, forced, edged with warning. I lifted my champagne flute in a neutral gesture, neither friendly nor aggressive. His smile sharpened. He excused himself from Evelyn and began moving toward me with that slow, deliberate stride of his that always reminded me of someone stepping onto a stage. "Madison," he said warmly, though the warmth didn't reach his eyes. "Didn't expect you to be this involved tonight. I thought Evelyn asked you to take a step back." I matched his expression. "She asked me to stay out of her way. I'm doing exactly that." He raised a brow. "And yet here you are, hovering." I breathed through the flare of anger in my chest. "I'm simply attending the party." He leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice. "Then do us both a favor and don't ruin it." A cold ripple went down my spine. "I'm not the one who's going to ruin anything." For a moment something flickered behind his eyes. Not confusion, not fear. Something darker, irritation maybe, or the faint recognition that power was slipping. Before he could respond, one of the caterers approached him. "Sir, the event manager needs you at the entrance for the final walkthrough." Gavin exhaled sharply. "Fine." He glanced at me once more. "Try to smile tonight. It is Christmas after all." He walked away before I could reply. I didn't realize I was trembling until I set the champagne glass on the nearest table, the stem rattling softly. I inhaled slowly, pressing my fingers against the cool linen tablecloth until the shaking eased. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as the pianist transitioned into a soft, elegant melody. A server lit each candle on the tables, tiny flames glowing like a constellation scattered across the room. Guests took their assigned seats, laughing as they settled in, unaware of the white envelopes waiting quietly beneath the first layer of napkins. I scanned the room for Ethan. He stood near the side wall, disguised easily among the staff clipboard in hand. His eyes flicked toward mine in silent acknowledgement. In 15 minutes, dinner would begin. In 20 minutes, guests would start opening their envelopes. In 30 minutes, the truth would ripple across the room like a shockwave. The event manager clinked a glass lightly, calling for attention. "Please take your seats. Dinner service will begin shortly." People settled in, pulling out chairs, placing napkins in laps, glancing at menus and commenting on the elegantly scripted calligraphy. I approached my assigned table near the back, far enough from the head table that I wouldn't draw Evelyn's immediate attention, but close enough to see her face when everything unfolded. A young couple beside me smiled politely. "Beautiful party, isn't it?" the woman said. "It is," I said softly. "Your sister must be thrilled," the man added. "She seems so happy." My chest tightened. "She thinks she is." The woman laughed lightly. "Well, tonight is magical. Hard not to be." I didn't have the heart to contradict her. At the head table, Evelyn stood beside Gavin as servers filled glasses. She looked radiant, almost ethereal in the candlelight, but her hands kept drifting to her stomach, clasping and unclasping tightly, and her gaze kept roaming the room, as though she sensed something just beyond her awareness. Gavin leaned over and whispered something into her ear. She nodded too quickly. He placed a hand over hers, covering her anxiety with the illusion of comfort. Anger rose in my throat like fire. The first course arrived, roasted butternut soup drizzled with cream. Guests murmured over the aroma-lifting spoons. A soft wave of conversation filled the room again. And then it began. At table 12, a woman reached for her napkin and paused, fingers brushing the envelope underneath. "What's this?" she asked her husband. He shrugged. "Looks like some kind of party note." She slipped the card from its sleeve and opened it. Her brows furrowed. Then her lips parted. She tapped her husband. He opened his. Soon, 2 other guests at their table followed. Their conversation fell silent, replaced by sharp inhales and darting glances. At table 9, an older man lifted his envelope, squinting as he read. His face went rigid. At table 7, a group of Evelyn's friends exchanged confused looks, each flipping open their envelopes. Whispers started spreading like sparks. A wave of unease swept across the room. I watched the ripples unfold quietly, the way one watches a storm approach, not with excitement, not with joy, but with the solemn understanding that the weather is changing and nothing can stop it. Then someone at table 4 stood, a woman with auburn hair and a trembling hand. I recognized her instantly, Linda Farrow. She held her envelope, high voice cracking as she shouted, "This man is a fraud." Silence swallowed the room. Silverware stilled, music ceased, conversations choked off mid-sentence. Evelyn, frozen at the head table, stared at Linda like she was an apparition. Gavin's expression flickered, not with shock but with fury. Linda's voice rose, broken and raw. "He stole from me, he lied to me, he promised investment returns and disappeared with my savings." Gasps echoed across the room. Another man stood, Daniel Rhodes. "He did the same to me," he said loudly. "Promised partnership, took my money and ran." Chaos erupted. Guests opened envelopes, scrutinized the documents, filled the air with disbelief, outrage, confusion. Evelyn swayed, gripping the edge of the table as color drained from her face. And Gavin! He bolted upright, eyes darting, searching for an exit. The truth had arrived, wrapped in white envelopes, delivered like Christmas gifts no one asked for, and nothing would ever be the same again. Guests began rising from their chairs in a ripple of disbelief as Gavin pushed away from the head table, knocking a crystal glass to the floor, where it shattered into bright, sharp fragments. For a moment, the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Only the flicker of candlelight moved, reflecting in the stunned faces turned toward him. The soft piano music had stopped abruptly, leaving the room suspended in a heavy electric silence. Evelyn's breath hitched visibly. She stood so quickly her chair toppled backward, clattering against the marble floor. Her silver dress caught the warm light like broken ice, her hands trembling as she looked from Gavin to the sea of guests rising with accusations whispered across the room. Gavin's gaze darted from table to table, his jaw clenching so tightly a muscle jumped beneath the skin. His eyes flicked to the envelopes scattered across the place settings, every one a doorway to a truth he had spent years burying in multiple states, multiple lives. Then he snapped. "This is ridiculous," he barked, stepping forward with the authoritative confidence of a man who had talked himself out of trouble too many times before. "These people are lying. They've been stalking me for years. They're obsessed. You're all falling for a sick joke." His voice ricocheted off the ballroom walls, but the desperation beneath it betrayed him. Linda Farrow stepped toward him, her hands shaking, but her voice steady. "I didn't want to come here tonight. I didn't want to relive any of it. But someone told me you were about to do it again to another woman. I came because she deserves to know what you are." Murmurs rose like a growing tide. Evelyn blinked, her lips parting in a silent plea for the room to stop spinning. She looked fragile, breakable, as if the weight of every lie Gavin had ever told had landed squarely on her chest. "Evelyn," Gavin said sharply, snapping his gaze to her, "don't listen to them. This is jealousy, hatred. They want to tear down everything we've built." She didn't answer. Her chin quivered. Her eyes flickered across the room, landing on the guests, reading through the documents, summaries of complaints, screenshots, financial trails, fragmented but unmistakable truths. "I've never even met these people," Gavin snarled. "This is some kind of actually a man near the back," said, standing slowly. "You met me in Michigan. Twice. You used a different name then." Laughter short, bitter wounded, broke from another guest holding a printed record. "You told me you'd lost everything in a fire and needed help starting over. I believed you. Her voice broke. "I even introduced you to my parents." Each sentence hit Gavin like stones thrown from every direction. He spun toward the side exit. Ethan stepped forward from the shadows near the serving door, calm, unreadable, and in a dark suit that blended seamlessly with the staff. He didn't rush, didn't posture, didn't try to intimidate. He simply watched Gavin with steady, unmoving eyes. The kind of eyes predators recognize. Gavin froze for a heartbeat. Then he shoved past a guest, making for the exit. Evelyn screamed, stumbling forward and reaching toward him. He didn't look back. The moment his fingers brushed the door handle, two plainclothes detectives, blending so effortlessly with the guests that I hadn't noticed them arrive, stepped out from opposite sides of the hallway. "Mr. Cole," one of them said calmly, using the last name Gavin hoped no one had remembered, "we need you to stay where you are." Gavin's entire body stiffened. "On what grounds?" "Multiple allegations across state lines," the detective said evenly. "We have enough to detain you for questioning." "You can't," Gavin hissed. "This is a private event. You have no right." "You came willingly," the detective replied, "which means you're accessible. You're not under arrest yet. But you will come with us." Gavin took a step back. The detective moved forward. Ethan shifted his stance barely an inch, but the message was clear: there was nowhere to go. Gavin lunged toward the opposite exit. Chaos erupted. Several guests gasped. Someone screamed. Chairs scraped violently against the floor as people stumbled out of his path. The second detective reacted quickly, grabbing Gavin's arm in a firm, controlled hold. Gavin twisted, snarling through clenched teeth. "Get your hands off me." He tried to yank free, but the officer tightened his grip, steady and immovable. "This isn't happening," Gavin spat. "You're all insane. She set this up. She's jealous. She wants to ruin my life." His eyes shot toward me with venom so sharp, it made the hair on the back of my neck rise. "She did this," he roared. "Madison Pierce is obsessed with tearing us apart. She's always hated me." Evelyn flinched so hard she nearly fell. I stepped forward, not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to stand where she could see me. Her eyes locked onto mine. Confusion, hurt, a desperate plea for explanation. "Is it true?" she whispered. "Did you do this?" Her voice trembled with something deeper than anger, something close to betrayal. I swallowed the ache rising in my chest. "Only the truth," I said softly. "Nothing more." She shook her head, tears forming. "But why tonight? Why like this?" "Because he was already taking pieces of your life," I whispered. "And he wasn't going to stop until you had nothing left." Before she could respond, Gavin lunged again, wrenching his body violently enough that the detective nearly lost grip. His tie twisted, crooked, his hair falling over his forehead in wild disarray. He looked nothing like the polished man Evelyn had chosen. He looked exactly like what he was, a cornered liar. "You think you can expose me?" Gavin screamed. "You think any of this matters? You don't know what she promised me. You don't know how much she needs me." Evelyn's sob cut through everything. "I never promised you anything. Not like this." Gavin's expression flickered something cold and desperate. "You said you wanted a future. You said you trusted me." "I did," she cried. "I did trust you." "And you threw it away because of her," he shouted, pointing at me as though I were the cause of every mistake he had ever made. A detective stepped between him and the guests. "That's enough." "No," Gavin growled. "You don't get to tell me." The detective pressed him firmly against the wall. They didn't cuff him yet, not until they formally declared detention, but the message was unmistakable. It was over. The room fell into stunned, horrified silence. Guests stared, some in shock, some in fury, some holding their envelopes like shields against the reality they'd just witnessed. Others whispered to one another, casting glances at Evelyn that were full of pity she couldn't bear. I turned to her. Her silver dress shimmered in the low light, but every part of her seemed to be collapsing. She pressed a trembling hand to her forehead, then her mouth, then her chest. I didn't know she whispered. "Madison?" I didn't know. My heart cracked at the rawness in her voice. "I believe you," I said. "I told you to disappear," she choked. "I told you were ruining my Christmas. I thought you were jealous. I thought you were hurting you on purpose." I finished softly. Her eyes filled with tears. Yes, I wanted to hold her, to wrap my arms around her, to give her comfort she didn't even know how to ask for, but she wasn't ready. Not yet. She was still trying to understand how her world had shattered in an instant. Behind us, the detectives escorted Gavin toward the hallway, their presence steady and unyielding. He twisted once more, shouting over his shoulder, "You think this is justice? You think she's safer with you? She's nothing without me." Evelyn's knees nearly buckled. Ethan stepped to her side instantly but didn't touch her. He simply positioned himself so she could lean if she chose to. She didn't. Instead, her eyes found me again. "What do I do now?" she whispered, sounding younger than I'd heard her since we were children. "What's left?" I took a slow breath and stepped close enough that she would feel the steadiness in my voice, if not in her own. "What's left," I said softly, "is your life, and your freedom, and the truth." She swallowed hard. "And you?" I hesitated only a moment. "I'm here, but I won't disappear to make someone else comfortable ever again." Her chin wobbled. "I don't want you to disappear." "I know," I whispered. "You just forgot for a while." She nodded brokenly. The detective's voice echoed from the hallway. "We'll be in touch once he's processed." Ethan turned to me, eyes full of quiet understanding. "It's done." But as I looked at Evelyn trembling in the glow of Christmas lights, meant to celebrate a future she no longer had, I knew one thing with aching certainty: it wasn't done. Not for her, not for us. The truth had broken open the night, but healing would be its own battle, and it was only just beginning. The house was silent by the time I returned home, the kind of heavy silence that settles after an emotional earthquake. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, letting the cool wood press into my back while the sound of my breath slowly evened out. My hands were still trembling. Not from fear, not exactly, but from the aftershock of everything that had unfolded just hours earlier. The confrontation, the accusations, the truth tearing itself free in front of everyone. Gavin's face when he realized the walls were closing in. Evelyn's face when she realized her perfect Christmas dream had been built on sand. I pushed off the door and walked into the kitchen, needing water, needing something grounding. The faucet hissed as I filled a glass. Then I stood there drinking it in slow, steady sips. My mind replayed the chaos of the night like a reel that wouldn't stop turning. The gasps, the whispers. The moment the envelopes opened, and truth spilled across linen tablecloths like ink. The detectives stepping forward. The way Gavin lunged. The way Evelyn collapsed inward. And then the moment that haunted me more than any of it, when she looked at me with tear-filled eyes and whispered, "I didn't know." She hadn't. For all her flaws, for all her blindness, she had been walking down a carefully constructed path of manipulation she didn't even realize she was on. I knew that now, and I knew something else tonight had broken her, and tomorrow would break her again. I set the empty glass down and rubbed at my forehead, thinking of the next steps, thinking of Ethan, thinking of the threat letter that had arrived earlier. Stay away from the gala. The memory made my throat tighten. I hadn't told Evelyn about it. I wasn't sure telling her now would help anything. A sudden knock on the door snapped my attention up. 3 soft taps. I froze. It wasn't late, just past 11, but it was far too late for anyone to casually drop by. My heart thudded once hard before I stepped slowly toward the door. I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I peered through the peephole. Ethan stood on my porch, his collar turned up against the cold snow catching in his hair. His expression was calm, like he had expected I wouldn't want more surprises tonight. I opened the door. "You came all the way here." He stepped inside, brushing off the cold. "I wanted to make sure you got home safely. And to make sure you weren't alone with all this." That simple phrase, "make sure you weren't alone," unraveled something tight in my chest. I stepped aside to let him in, closing the door behind him. The warmth of the house felt different with him, in its steadier, less hollow. "Do you want tea, or—" I gestured vaguely toward the kitchen, suddenly aware of how exhausted I was. He shook his head. "No, I won't stay long. I just needed to check in." I nodded and leaned against the counter, crossing my arms to keep myself anchored. Tonight was brutal, he finished for me. But necessary. I know I whispered. But I keep seeing her face. The shock. The fear. The way she shrank when he shouted. "That's how manipulation works," Ethan said gently. "It makes you doubt the ground beneath your own feet." "She didn't deserve this," I murmured. "No," he agreed. "But she'll recover. Because she has you." I swallowed around the lump in my throat. "I don't know if she sees me as a support. Not tonight." "Not tonight," he echoed softly. "But she will." I looked down at my hands, noticing a faint smear of glitter from brushing against Evelyn's dress earlier. It was a strange reminder of how fragile she had looked in that moment, beautiful, trembling, and utterly unprepared for the truth that had cracked her world apart. "There's something else," Ethan said quietly, pulling my attention back to him, something I didn't mention earlier. My pulse quickened. "What?" He reached into his coat and pulled out a small plastic bag, the kind evidence came in. Inside was a folded piece of paper. A very familiar piece of paper. My breath caught. "That's the threat letter." "Yes," he said. "I took it to a contact in cyber investigations. We checked for prints. Nothing usable. But there's something else." He opened the bag, carefully sliding the letter out without touching it directly. I looked at the indentation marks, he said. "Sometimes pressure from writing leaves impressions from previous notes. There's a faint imprint on the backside." "What does it say?" I whispered. He stepped closer, holding it up to the light. "It's partial, but clear enough." I waited, the silence thick. Finally, he read it aloud. "Call me as soon as she signs." A chill washed over me. "Gavin," I breathed. "Most likely," he said. "The timing lines up. But the phrasing, it suggests he was coordinating with someone." "What do you mean, someone?" Ethan folded the letter back into the bag. He wasn't working alone. Someone else was involved in the financial setup. Whether or not they knew the extent of his plans is unclear. My stomach twisted. Someone helping him? Or someone he was manipulating too? Possibly both, Ethan said. That's what I'm trying to determine. I pressed my fingertips into the counter. What do we do? I'll keep investigating, he said. But you need to be careful. People like Gavin don't build their schemes alone. And they don't let them collapse quietly. I looked up sharply. You think I'm in danger? Ethan didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. The concern in his eyes was enough. Security first, he said. Change your passwords, lock your doors, don't respond to unknown numbers. He may not have acted alone, but tonight sent a message, and people react unpredictably when their power disappears. A tremor ran through me. Evelyn. What if whoever was helping him tries to reach her? I've already asked officers to keep an eye on the immediate family, Ethan said. She won't be left unprotected tonight. Relief loosened something in my chest. Thank you. He stepped closer just enough that his voice lowered naturally. You don't have to carry this alone. You did something incredibly brave tonight, but bravery comes with aftermath. And you're allowed to feel shaken. I met his gaze. It held no judgment, no pity, just quiet, steady understanding. I keep thinking, I whispered, what if I had confronted her sooner? What if I had seen the signs earlier? You can't rewrite the past, he said softly. But you changed her future, and that matters more. We stood there for a moment, the silence between us gentle rather than heavy. Then he stepped back. Get some rest, Madison. Tomorrow will be a long day. I nodded, though I knew sleep would be a distant possibility. He walked to the door. I followed him, watching as he paused with his hand on the knob. He turned back, his expression softening. You did the right thing, even if it feels unbearable right now. I exhaled slowly. It does feel unbearable. That's how truth feels when it first breaks through. He opened the door. The cold air rushed in, biting at the warmth of the house. As he stepped onto the porch, he looked back once more. Call me if anything at all feels off. I nodded. Then he was gone. I closed the door and pressed my forehead against it, the wood cool against my skin. The tremor in my hands returned, but this time it wasn't fear. It was the weight of everything I knew was coming. I turned off the lights and walked into the living room, dropping onto the couch with a long exhale. My eyes drifted to the window where snow was falling in soft, steady flakes under the streetlight. The storm outside felt quieter than the storm inside me. I pulled a blanket over my lap, letting the silence settle. My phone buzzed once. A single email notification flashed across the screen. Subject, tomorrow. No message. No sender name. Just that one word. A chill slid down my spine. Tomorrow. I stared at the screen until the light dimmed. Outside, snowflakes drifted. Inside, everything in me whispered the same truth. Tomorrow was coming. And with it, everything I couldn't avoid anymore. I walked out of the ballroom and into the crisp night air, the cold hitting my lungs so sharply it felt like a reset. The sky above the Christmas lights was a washed-out navy, the kind of winter darkness that absorbed sound and made everything feel farther away than it really was. I stepped onto the back patio of the event center, the hum of voices fading behind me as the doors closed. For a long moment I just stood there, gripping the railing, breath fogging in small, uneven clouds, while my heart struggled to catch up to everything that had just happened. Inside, guests were still buzzing with disbelief. Someone had cried, someone had shouted. Gavin had been escorted through those double doors, kicking and swearing, the detectives gripping his arms tightly. Cameras had flashed. Shock had rippled through the room in waves, each gasp louder than the last. But out here the world seemed still uncaring, as if it had seen human catastrophes many times before. I inhaled the icy air, closed my eyes, and let the weight of the night settle into my bones. My hands were still trembling slightly, not from fear, at least not anymore, but from the aftershock of the truth erupting in the most public, irreversible way possible. Months of manipulation, lies, financial exploitation, and emotional erosion had been dragged into the open, and the person who had caused most of it was now sitting in the back of a police car. A faint crunch of snow behind me broke my thoughts. I turned to see Ethan approaching, hands tucked into his coat pockets, his steps quiet but purposeful. "I thought I'd find you out here," he said, his breath misting the air. "How are you holding up?" I let out a shaky breath. "I don't know. Ask me tomorrow." "That's fair," he said softly. He stepped beside me and leaned on the railing, his shoulder almost brushing mine. Tonight was a lot, even for someone who expected it. "I didn't expect it to be this loud," I whispered. "This huge." "The truth usually is," he murmured, "especially when someone's been hiding it for so long." I looked down at the snow-covered ground. Tiny flakes drifted across the patio like ash. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "Yes, absolutely." He looked at me like I ruined his life. Ethan scoffed. "He ruined his own life. You just stopped him from ruining your sister's." A silence spread between us, but not an uncomfortable one. More like a moment of shared understanding, the kind that didn't need words to fill its space. "I saw the way Evelyn looked at you," Ethan finally said, "after everything happened. She wasn't angry. She wasn't anything I whispered. She just fell apart." "That's part of the process," he said gently. "When everything you believed collapses at once, your mind shuts down to protect you." I tightened my grip on the railing. I wish I could help her. I wish she wanted me to help her. Ethan studied me with steady eyes. "You helped her more tonight than you have in years, whether she knows it yet or not." The door behind us suddenly opened. I turned around expecting another guest, but instead it was the event manager, a soft-spoken man in a black suit. "Excuse me," he said apologetically, "but some guests are asking about the next steps. A few are upset. If you need a quiet space, we can set one up." I nodded, appreciating the offer. "Thank you. I just need a few minutes." He gave a sympathetic smile and disappeared back inside. Ethan exhaled. "Chaos always leaves a wake. I feel like I'm living in the wake," I said. Maybe he replied, "But you're swimming instead of drowning." "That matters." I gave him a faint, tired smile. He returned it with something steady, grounding. The moon tucked itself behind a thin cloud, dimming the patio a little more. I looked across the snowy lake, its surface reflecting faint Christmas lights from the venue. "What happens next?" I asked quietly. "Legally," Ethan said. "He'll be processed tonight. The victims who came forward will finally have formal statements taken. More victims might surface once the story spreads. And Evelyn." He angled his body toward me. "She's safe. Hurt, yes. Shocked, absolutely. But safe now." There was a pause. "And you," he added softly. I didn't answer right away. I looked down at my hands, flexing my fingers slowly. I thought confronting him would feel like victory, but it feels heavy. "Because you're human," he said, "not vindictive." I swallowed, throat tight. I didn't do this to punish him. I did it to protect her. And that's exactly why it was the right thing, he said. "Your intentions matter, and so do your boundaries." Boundaries. The word lingered in the air like something fragile and newly formed. Before I could respond, the door opened again. This time it was a woman, the same bridesmaid who had whispered earlier in the dressing room, "Tessa." Her red dress was rumpled, her mascara smudged slightly from crying. "Madison," she said, her voice soft, cautious. "Evelyn, she's asking for you." My heart skipped. "She is," Tessa nodded. "She's in one of the private rooms with the coordinator." "She keeps asking where you went." I exchanged a glance with Ethan. His expression softened. "Go," he said. "She needs you." I inhaled, deeply nodded, and followed Tessa back inside. As the ballroom doors shut behind me, the hum of whispers grew faint, replaced by the quiet buzz of staff trying to regain control of the evening. The building felt less festive now that the truth had ripped through it, but wreaths and garlands still hung across the hallways, as if the decorations themselves hadn't noticed the disaster beneath them. Tessa led me down a quiet corridor lined with frosted windows. At the end of the hall was a small lounge with soft lighting and 2 armchairs. The coordinator stood at the doorway and stepped aside when she saw me. Inside, Evelyn sat curled into one of the chairs, her shoulders trembling, her face blotchy from tears. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, fragile, in a way that made my heart twist sharply. She lifted her head when I walked in. Her eyes were swollen but searching. "Madison," she whispered, "I didn't know you were still here." "I'm here," I said softly, taking a seat across from her. For a moment neither of us spoke. The space between us felt like thin glass, one wrong word could shatter it. Finally, she drew in a shaky breath. Everything I thought was real just broke in front of me. I nodded. "I know. I didn't know about the loans," she murmured. "The accounts. Everything. He told me he was trying to build a future for us. He told me not to worry." "That's what people like him do," I said gently. "They create storms and then convince you they're holding the umbrella." She stared at her hands. "I feel stupid." "You aren't stupid, Evelyn," I said firmly. "You were targeted." She swallowed, tears rising again. "Why didn't you tell me you suspected something earlier?" I hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because you weren't ready to hear it. You would have defended him. And he would have used that to pull you further away from me." Her lips trembled. "You're probably right." "I didn't want to lose you," I whispered. "Not again. But I couldn't watch him destroy you." She curled her knees toward her chest, hugging them loosely. "When I said that thing yesterday, that horrible thing about disappearing from Christmas, I didn't mean it." "I know," I said quietly. "But it still hurt." She winced. "I'm sorry. I was angry and stressed and blinded by everything he fed me. I let him twist the way I saw you. I let him twist everything." I leaned forward slightly. "Evelyn, listen to me. None of this is your fault. You didn't choose manipulation. You didn't choose deception. You just wanted someone to love you." She pressed her hand to her mouth. "He told me I was lucky he stayed despite my family complications. He told me you were jealous. He told me you were trying to ruin our future." A flicker of anger stirred in me. He needed to isolate you. That's how control works. Her voice cracked. I didn't want to believe him, but I kept seeing our childhood the way you were always the strong one, the one who held everything together. And I thought, maybe you really did look down on me. "I never did," I whispered. "I was just trying to survive too." She looked up, her eyes meeting mine with a mix of desperation and hope. "Do you hate me?" The question pierced through me. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I don't hate you, but I needed something to change. And tonight, everything changed." Silence settled again, softer this time. Finally, she spoke, her voice small. "Can you stay with me?" "Just for a little while," I nodded. "Of course." She reached out timidly, as if expecting me to pull away. I didn't. I took her hand, feeling the tremor still lingering in her fingers. For the first time in years, her grip didn't feel like a weight dragging me down. It felt like someone reaching up, asking to be pulled back into the light. We sat there in the quiet room. Christmas lights, flickering faintly through the frosted windows, the echoes of the night still humming somewhere in the building. And in that stillness, something subtle shifted between us. Something necessary. She wasn't healed. I wasn't whole. But for the first time since the truth shattered our Christmas, we were finally on the same side. And tomorrow, whatever tomorrow looked like, we would face it without the lies that had nearly destroyed us both. I drove home from the resort the next morning with the heat on high, and my fingertips still stiff from the cold. The sun had barely lifted over the horizon, casting long, pale ribbons across the highway, and the world outside my windshield felt strangely quiet. Too quiet for what had happened the night before. Snow lined the shoulders of the road in untouched sheets, and every now and then I'd pass a farmhouse with smoke curling from the chimney, the kind of peaceful scene that looked ripped from a postcard. But peace wasn't what I felt. Not exactly. It was something weightier, something like the settling of dust after a collapse. Something like clarity. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked the same as always, small tidy the wreath on the front door slightly crooked, because I'd hung it in a hurry earlier that week. But walking inside felt different. The air felt heavier, as if some invisible layer of exhaustion had seeped into the walls. I set my purse on the table and hung my coat on the hook by the door before standing still for a moment, letting the quiet wrap around me. I thought I would collapse. Instead, I made tea. Maybe because it was the only thing grounding enough to occupy my hands. Maybe because the routine was comforting. The kettle hissed softly, a familiar sound in a life that had become unnervingly unfamiliar overnight. While I waited for the water to boil, my phone buzzed twice on the counter. Unknown number. Then another call from a local Minnesota area code. I didn't answer either. I wasn't ready to hear the reactions from people who'd been at the Christmas party. I wasn't ready to sort through questions or shock or sympathy. I stood at the counter staring at my reflection in the darkened microwave door. My eyes looked tired but sharper, as if they had finally stopped looking for excuses for other people. It felt strange. It felt good. It felt like standing on the edge of the shore after a storm, everything broken, but the ground finally still beneath me. The kettle clicked off. I poured the water over a bag of cinnamon tea and let the steam roll up into my face. As I wrapped my hands around the mug, I felt the ache in my fingers start to ease. But the moment didn't last long. A small alert chimed from my laptop in the living room. I set my tea down and crossed the room, opening the lid. I expected a work email or maybe a notification from my bank. Instead, a new message flashed across the screen. From my attorney. I clicked it open. Madison, I'm writing to confirm the condo sale has fully processed. The final signatures cleared this morning and funds were transferred at 7:14 a.m. EST. Congratulations. It's done. I stared at the words. Something in my chest loosened in a way I hadn't anticipated. Even after everything with Evelyn and Gavin, a small shadow of doubt had lingered in me, as if some loophole or hidden document might still give him a claim. But that message closed every door he'd tried to pry open. It's done. I whispered the words under my breath. They felt like peeling off the last tight string around my ribs. And yet, even as relief washed through me, something else tugged at my thoughts. Evelyn. Last night she had asked me to stay with her, and I had. For hours we sat together in the quiet lounge, not talking much but not drifting apart either. At some point she'd leaned her head against the back of the chair and fallen asleep, exhaustion overtaking panic. When the coordinator returned, I had helped her escort Evelyn to a spare room the resort provided, tucked her under a clean blanket, and left without waking her. I hadn't heard from her since. I sat back on the couch and pulled my knees up to my chest, taking a sip of tea. The cinnamon felt warm and grounding on my tongue. I wondered if she knew the condo was no longer at risk. I wondered if she would feel betrayed or protected. I wondered if she would blame me or thank me. But one thing I didn't wonder about anymore was whether I'd made the right choice. I knew I had. For the first time in years, I felt sure of myself. My phone buzzed again. This time I recognized the number. It was Ethan, I answered. Hey, his voice came through low, steady, familiar. Just checking in on you. A soft exhale left my chest. I'm okay, tired. Figured. There was a brief rustle like he was walking or shifting something on his desk. I just left the station. They processed Gavin last night. He's facing multiple charges from multiple states. I swallowed. Good. And Ethan continued. 2 more victims reached out this morning after hearing what happened. One from Michigan, one from New Hampshire. They're willing to make sworn statements. I closed my eyes. So the case is solid. Very, he said. It's no longer a question of if he'll face consequences. It's how many. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he added quietly, You did something incredibly brave. I let out a short laugh, soft, almost disbelieving. It didn't feel brave. It felt terrifying. Bravery usually does. There was another pause, and then Ethan's voice softened further. "Have you heard from your sister?" "No," I murmured. "Not yet." "Give her time," he said gently. "She's processing betrayal from someone she was about to build a life with. The ground under her feet is gone. But she's standing because you made sure she could." His words pressed against the quiet corners of my heart. "Thank you," I whispered. Any time he replied. And I believed him. After we hung up, I sat on the couch, letting the tea warm my hands while the winter sun crawled higher through the blinds. For the first time since everything erupted, I opened my journal. I hadn't written in weeks, maybe months. My last entry was short, rushed, scribbled on a day when I felt overwhelmed at work and guilty about Evelyn. But now, as I flipped to a blank page, the words flowed easily. I wrote about fear. I wrote about anger. I wrote about truth. And then I wrote about freedom. By the time I closed the journal, my hands were steadier. The rest of the morning drifted by quietly. I showered. I changed into soft clothes. I answered a few work messages. I made a simple lunch. Each action felt strangely deliberate, like I was relearning what my life looked like without constantly bracing for the next crisis. In the afternoon, I stepped outside to take out the trash. The cold air brushed across my cheeks and a soft snowfall drifted from the sky. The neighborhood looked peaceful. White roofs, quiet sidewalks, a few Christmas lights still clinging to porches even though the holiday itself had ended. When I turned back toward the house, I noticed something on the front steps. A small white envelope. My chest tightened. I walked toward it slowly, like approaching something fragile. My name was written on the front in neat handwriting. Evelyn's handwriting. I hesitated, then picked it up and carried it inside. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the kitchen table, staring at it for a long moment before finally sliding a finger under the flap. Inside was a single folded note. I unfolded it. "Madison, I don't know how to talk to you yet. I don't know how to look you in the eye without seeing everything that fell apart. But I also know that I can't let shame be the thing that keeps me silent. I want you to know that I remember everything you did for me when we were young, everything you did for me now, and everything you didn't say even when you had every right to. I am not ready to face you today, but I will be. Please don't disappear. Love, E." My breath hitched. I sat down at the table, the note shaking slightly in my hands. Please don't disappear. The same woman who had told me the greatest Christmas gift would be my disappearance now asked me not to vanish from her life. And there was no malice in her words this time. No manipulation. No resentment. Just something tender and cracked and trying. I pressed the note against my chest for a moment and closed my eyes. She was hurt. She was healing. And she was reaching out. I placed the letter carefully inside my journal and stared out the window as snow continued to fall in slow, drifting spirals. The world outside my house looked soft, peaceful, almost reborn. And somewhere deep inside me, something felt the same. Later that evening, after the snow had picked up and the house was washed in a soft white glow, I lit a candle on the coffee table and wrapped myself in a blanket. I opened my laptop and pulled up a spreadsheet I'd been avoiding for weeks, my savings, my future plans, the little details of a life I'd been too distracted to fully claim. As I typed, adjusting numbers and goals, creating a fresh list of things I wanted for myself, something small and steady settled in my chest. Not triumph, not victory, just a quiet, grounded certainty. For once, the future didn't feel like something happening to me. It felt like something I was building, brick by brick, choice by choice, truth by truth. Somewhere near midnight, my phone buzzed one last time. A message appeared at the top of the screen. Evelyn, thank you for saving me. I'll call tomorrow, I promise. I read it twice, then turned my phone face down on the table. Tomorrow could wait. Tonight, for the first time in years, I finally belonged to myself. 6 months later, I woke to the quiet kind of morning that didn't demand anything from me. Sunlight slipped softly through the blinds, warming the room in long golden stripes. Outside my bedroom window, the maple trees lining my street in Madison had begun to leaf out again, filling the air with that fresh green scent that only late spring carried. For a moment I lay still beneath the quilt, listening to the faint hum of the neighborhood, a dog barking 2 houses down a door, closing gently, someone starting a car with an old engine that coughed before settling. It was ordinary in every way, and yet it felt extraordinary to me. This was my life now. Quiet, steady, and mine. I stretched, slid out of bed, and padded barefoot toward the kitchen. The hardwood floor felt warm under my feet. I started the coffee maker and leaned against the counter as it burbled to life, filling the room with that familiar, bitter aroma. It had become part of my morning ritual, one of many rituals I had built these past months with deliberate care, the kind of structure I used to envy in other people, but never allowed myself before. After everything that happened at the Christmas party, I thought my life would fracture into 1,000 unrecognizable pieces. But instead, it reassembled itself in a shape that finally made sense. Not perfect, not painless, but true. Evelyn and I had taken our time rebuilding whatever remained between us. She called the morning after she left the envelope on my doorstep. Her voice was thin, trembling at the edges, but honest. We talked for nearly 2 hours, slowly, carefully, like 2 people learning how to hold fragile glass without crushing it. Then we called again 2 days later, and again the week after that. Gradually, the conversations stretched longer, softer, safer. They became something that didn't hurt to hold. She was working with a financial counselor now. She was attending therapy twice a week. She had moved into a small apartment 10 minutes from the insurance office where she found a stable job that didn't demand more than she could give. She was learning to live without Gavin, without crisis, without hiding. I was learning something too, not how to live without her, but how to live without sacrificing myself to her pain. That was new and necessary. The coffee machine clicked off. I poured a cup, wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, and walked to the sliding glass door that looked out over my small backyard. The grass shimmered with dew. A pair of sparrows hopped along the fence line. A soft breeze moved the leaves in a lazy rhythm. For so long, mornings like this felt impossible. Now they felt earned. I grabbed my journal from the side table and opened it on the kitchen counter. I had started journaling again in January, shaky at first, but steadier with time. Today, though, instead of writing, I simply flipped back through old pages. There were entries filled with grief and confusion. Entries filled with anger. Then later entries filled with something gentler, acceptance maybe. Hope. I closed the book gently. Around 9, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Evelyn. Brunch, later. Only if you feel up for it. No pressure. 6 months ago, she would have said something like, "You said we'd talk today. Can you come over? I need you." Now she gave me space. Now she asked instead of pulled. I smiled and typed back. "Brunch sounds good. Same place." She answered seconds later. "Yes. And coffee's on me this time. Coffee on her." 6 months ago, she didn't even know how much she owed her bank. This was growth in the form of a tiny, almost invisible victory, the kind that mattered. I went upstairs and changed into jeans and a soft cream sweater before driving down the quiet residential street that curved toward the small cafe where we usually met. It had outdoor seating, mismatched metal chairs, and cinnamon waffles that smelled like childhood. When I arrived, Evelyn was already there, seated at a corner table beneath a string of fairy lights. She looked different now, softer around the edges, not in a weakened way, but in a way that suggested she'd finally unclenched a fist she'd been holding since we were teenagers. She wore her hair loose without the careful styling she once obsessed over. Her makeup was subtle. Her shoulders sat lower as if some invisible weight had finally been set down. "Hey," she said when she saw me, her smile small but real. "Hey," I replied, sliding into the chair across from her. We ordered coffee and waffles. She talked about a weekend hiking trip she and a coworker were planning. I told her about the gardening class I'd signed up for. Our words wove easily, not strained, not cautious, simply normal. When the server left us alone with our plates, Evelyn grew quiet. "There's something I wanted to tell you," she said, tracing the rim of her mug with one finger. "I met with the legal aid group again last week. They reviewed all the remaining paperwork. And it looks like most of the mess Gavin pushed onto me is resolvable. I won't be saddled with the debts he tried to rope me into." I nodded. "That's good news." She hesitated. "They said part of the reason the case was so easy to untangle was because you sold the condo. If you hadn't moved that fast, the bank might have approved something before the fraud was flagged." I took a sip of my coffee. "I know." She looked up at me, her eyes quiet. "You didn't owe me that." "You didn't owe me any of it." "I know," I said softly. "But I did it anyway." She breathed out slowly. "I keep thinking about the envelope you gave me, the one with the letter. I read it again yesterday. I felt a small pinch in my chest. And it made me cry," she said, her voice quivering. "Not because of the condo, but because of the last line. The one about us not owing each other for guardianship or survival anymore." I swallowed. "I meant that. I know." She reached across the table slowly, giving me time to pull back if I needed to. When I didn't, she rested her fingers lightly on my wrist. "It felt like you finally let me step off the pedestal I never asked for. And step out of the shadow I put you in." I looked at her hand on mine. It wasn't a desperate grip this time. It wasn't an anchor dragging me downward. It was something else. Something healing. "I love you," she whispered, "but I don't expect you to fix me anymore." A warm ache spread through my chest. "And I don't expect you to be the strong one anymore," I murmured. "We can just be sisters, not roles." Her eyes softened. "I'd like that." We ate in comfortable silence for a while. When we finished, we walked together toward the little park nearby. Kids kicked a soccer ball across the grass. Someone was walking a golden retriever. A couple sat on a bench sharing headphones. The world felt simple in a way I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. As we strolled down the path, Evelyn nudged me gently. "Did you ever imagine we'd get here?" "No," I admitted, "but I'm glad we did. Me too." We reached the small footbridge overlooking the pond. The water shimmered under the sunlight, a few ducks gliding lazily across its surface. Evelyn leaned her elbows on the railing. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to think revenge meant hurting someone back. But what you did, it wasn't revenge at all. It was truth. And I think sometimes the truth is the only revenge that actually frees you." I thought about that. About everything I'd endured, everything I'd uncovered, everything I'd let go. Maybe I said softly, "Maybe the truth is the only thing worth choosing in the end." She looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think you'll ever tell this story?" I laughed gently. "Maybe someday. When I'm ready." She squeezed my arm. "You tell stories better than anyone I know. Maybe someone out there needs it. Maybe someone did." We stayed on the bridge until the breeze grew cooler, then walked back toward the cafe parking lot. When Evelyn hugged me goodbye, it wasn't tight or desperate. It was warm, balanced, a beginning instead of a rescue. When I drove home, sunlight filtered through the trees, scattering gold along the street. My townhouse waited quietly for me, the first true home I'd built entirely for myself, with choices that belonged to me and no one else. Inside, I set my keys on the table and stood for a moment in the soft afternoon light. My journal lay open on the counter where I'd left it earlier. I picked up my pen, flipped to a fresh page, and wrote a single sentence. "I am not disappearing. I am becoming." I closed the book gently, letting that truth settle into my bones. And as the house filled with the warm glow of late-day sun, I felt something deep and steady rise in me, a sense of restoration of self, of a future wide and open and no longer shaped by fear or obligation. If you've ever been told that your absence would be a gift, Remember this. Your presence in the right shape and on your own terms is the real miracle. And sometimes the greatest revenge is simply choosing yourself. If this story found you at the moment you needed it, tell me in the comments what part of it stayed with you, and share where in the world you're listening from. And if you want more stories of truth healing and the quiet power of starting over, stay here with me. There's more to come.